Tzarayim Tovim. Our Parsha this week, the last in Sefer VaYikra, is Parshat BeHar-BeChukotai, another double. And I've entitled this God in Our Collective. I hope this finds all well with you and that we are all doing as well as we can in these crazy times and with all these difficult situations that continue to swirl around our heads. As we begin this Parsha, we read in this last double Parsha of Sefer VaYikra, chapter 25, as follows. God speaks to Moshe, Har Sinai Lemor, at Har Sinai, saying. So why does this say at Har Sinai? Why do we focus on the fact that the laws were specifically given there? We know that this was the case. Why is this stated? So Rashi suggests that we're going to talk about the sabbatical laws. We're going to talk about the laws of the land. And in so doing, we should understand that these are just as important as all the other laws. The laws regarding us and God are of paramount importance. The laws regarding us and each other are of paramount importance. And the laws regarding us and the land are of paramount importance. There's this symbiotic relationship between all in order to make sure that it works as it should in its totality. So, at this point, we hear, while we're listening to this set of instructions, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta aleihem ki tavo el ha'aretz asher ani noten lechem v'shavtem ha'aretz Shabbat l'Hashem. Speak to the Israelites. You are going to enter the land that I'm giving you. The land must have a Shabbat as well. Remember, Shabbat has already been attached to us, to God, to honoring our parents, to working, to how we interact with each other. All of these things are part of the wheels that make this work. Therefore, while one might look at this and say Shabbat l'Adonai seems to be a superfluous use of the word, the point here is Shabbat l'Adonai. Not only are the laws of the land important and critical, but they are connected to God. The commandment that the land must rest is specifically for God, that God created the world, God created Shabbat for us to rest, and God created this Shabbaton for the land to rest as well. Here we see this ongoing and interconnected, interlaced relationship between all of God's created elements and the need for rest, a period of stasis for all, the Shabbat. After 15 verses explaining the various detailed elements of the sabbatical and jubilee year, we come to this point. We've talked about the land, now we move on. V'lo toneh ish et amito. You may not taunt your fellow Jew. You must fear HaShem. You must have awe for HaShem. And this ki ani Hashem Elokechem keeps repeating throughout the giving of the laws, lest you think that this particular law is not important. So what if I make fun of somebody? What's the big deal? No, it is a big deal. Everything counts here. I'm in the process of going through Rambam's Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Sanhedrin v'Onashim, the laws of the Sanhedrin, the body that rules, and the Onashim, the punishments that are meted out. And one of the most painful things to read are the various punishments that are meted out for various misdeeds, for various averot, for various wrongdoings. And clearly taunting, use of language, blasphemy in terms of God, embarrassing another in terms of people, are all counted as offenses to be punished. Further, Rashi says, God is the one who knows all the thoughts of all people. What if I have a bad intention? But regarding any matter that one has as part of his personal province, even the thinking in one's heart, God is aware. That's why it says, Lo toneh ish et amito. Do not taunt your fellow. Even if you don't say the words and they're in your head, God knows. So here we're taught, Kan he's here alonat devarim. Here we're taught about the damage that words can do, that they can hurt people, and even the intent to say the words can hurt people. So we must be aware at all times of our speech, of our thinking, and of our deeds. Sometimes we'll read in the anashim and the punishments that are meted out, im en kan maaseh. There's not a deed there, if there's not something specific. But words can become deeds. Think about in this country the amount of hate speech. And when we are legally asked to distinguish between speech and actionables, if somebody says that person is X and they should be killed, and you say it to a dangerous person, can the speaker be held accountable? Legally, yes. And in terms of these laws, definitely so. It then says in the next pasuk, you will carry out my rules and safeguard my ordinances and perform them. And only then, we're taught, will you live on the land securely. Yishavtam al haaretz. So our living on the land, v'asitem echlukotai ve'et mishpatai kishmuru, v'asitem yishavtam al haaretz vetach. Our secure existence on the land is based here on all of the laws, on all of the ordinances, including how we treat the land, how we treat each other, how we act ourselves, what we think, what we say, and so on and so forth. In this Parsha, which includes the most difficult passage of the curses if we do not follow God's law, known as the Tochacha, this is the first appearance of the Tochacha, the latter appearance will be in Devarim, we are brought up short in terms of what will happen if we do not listen and if we are abusive toward each other. Unfortunately, we know all too well humans are apt to do this. It's part of human nature. So what is the unifying theme here in the midst of our laws of the sabbatical and jubilee years? How we have to treat each other. Do not hurt somebody even in your thinking. The curses of what will happen if we do not act appropriately. This is about the collective. If you will, this is your Venn diagram of who we are and all the aspects of our lives and how they are interlaced with each other, with HaShem directing the interfacing of the parts of the Venn diagram. This is about the collective. This is about all of us being in the boat together, so to speak. Social responsibility, civic responsibility, thinking about the land, thinking about all of us together, not an individual in a silo. We can't be the person on the boat that digs a hole under our seat and everybody else begins to worry and to be concerned, and we say, what's your problem? It's only under my seat. For only by being part of a healthy and proper collective will we survive. Only then will we get to dwell on the land we are given securely. Yishavtam al haaretz levetach. It's not a directive per se coming from God as much as an indication of what we need to do in order to achieve that goal. Our part in this. God has put the land there. God has chosen us. God has given us the law. How do we put all of it together? As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono L'Shalom, explains, in the final Parsha of the book of VaYikra, during one of the most searing curses ever to have been uttered to a nation by way of warning, the sages find a fleck of pure gold. Moshe, is describing a nation in flight from its enemies. Just as the sound of a wind-blown leaf will put them to running, and they will run scared, as if running from the sword. They will fall even if no one is chasing them. They will stumble over each other as they would before a sword, even though no one is chasing them. You will have no power to stand before your enemies as a collective. In other words, if you can't act properly as a collective. There is on the face of it nothing positive in this nightmare scenario. But the sages say they will stumble over each other. And we are told by Rashi to read this as stumble al, because of one another. In other words, this teaches Kol Yisrael Aravim Zebazeh. Everyone in Israel is tied to the other to make this collective. We are responsible for each other. We often translate it that way. But Aravim, Eruv, is really about being connected to each other and being accountable to each other. Rabbi Sachs continues, this is an extremely strange passage. Why locate this principle of Kol Yisrael Eravim Zebazeh here? Surely the whole Torah testifies it. When Moshe speaks about the reward for keeping the covenant, he does so collectively. We've talked about this in our talks all along the way about the interfacing of singular and plural, when we're being spoken to as individuals that form the collective and when we're being spoken to as a collective of the individuals. It works both ways. We are taught, as Rabbi Sachs continues, there will be rain in its due season. You will have good harvests and so on. The principle that Jews have collective responsibility, that their fate and destiny are interlinked. This could have been found in the Torah's blessings. Why is it here amongst the curses? So I would suggest that it is to indicate that the curses are not a fait accompli if we rise to the occasion, if we act appropriately. One of the things that strikes me as I'm learning Hilchot Sanhedrin Ve'onashim is the punishments are excruciating. They're given in great detail. So I ask myself, why are they given in such great detail? It's so that no one goes above and beyond. And it's so that the one who is punished has to be punished. For example, with Malchot, with stripes, it says that the person administering the stripes should be greater, the hits, the blows, should be greater in knowledge and lesser in physical strength. In other words, your point is to punish the person, not to obliterate them. And then very clearly defines how once one has been punished, how do they get to re-enter society? Re-entry is as important as pulling apart. And the collective has as much responsibility for this re-entry as the individual wrongdoer does. Only by having a reward or blessing for the community and consequences of wrong actions will individuals survive, thrive, and prosper. Jewish practice is all about this. As part of this collective responsibility and care for the community, we are taught as follows in chapter 25, verse 35. V'chi yamuch achicha umateh yado imach v'hechazakta bo ger v'toshav v'chai imach. When your brother is becoming destitute, when someone in your community is becoming destitute, you must support him as soon as you see him faltering, so that by strengthening him, he can continue to live with you. And here again, we see ger v'toshav, both whoever you may consider to be the other or the stranger, and the one who you consider to be your equal, your friend, your colleague. So let's look carefully at this verse. There's no even if. You have to do this. When someone in your community is in trouble, you help them, regardless of the degree of closeness that you feel or don't feel to that person. We go on. You must not take interest from him, from this person. You must not gain from his misfortune. In other words, if you loan somebody who's destitute, you cannot charge interest. You must enable your brother to live with you. V'yarata me'elokecha. And fear, have awe for God. God created all of us, and we must take care of each other. You must not give him the money that you give him to help, to be paid back with interest. You may not benefit in any way from helping him. And then immediately after this, again, we read our pisman, our refrain. Ani HaShem Elokechem asher tzitechem me'eretz Mitzrayim, latet lachem et eretz Canaan liyot lachem levim. I took you out of the land of Egypt to bring you to this land. I am your God. We are reminded of those pivotal chapters in VaYikra. Yud-Chet through Chaf. Yud-Chet, the practice of the Mitzrim, who did not have concern for each other, who were promiscuous and who were careless and who were abusive. In 20, the Canaanim, who were again permissive and promiscuous and abusive and not accountable to each other. And then chapter 19, Kedoshim Tehiyu ki anochi HaShem Kadosh. You must be Kadosh because I am Kadosh. And I am requiring you to live on a different level. You are my people, and you must follow my ways as instructed. I did not take you out of Mitzrayim. I did not save you from the Amalekites. I am not bringing you to Canaan to take this land so that you can become as self-centered and power-hungry as others. You have to live the way I tell you. This is the way you will live as a collective, al ha'aretz levetach, on this land securely. As chapter 35 continues, we amplify this notion. Verse 39. And if your brother Israelite is living with you, becomes destitute, and is dentured to you as a bondsman, and I want to be very clear about this, this is where the Eved Ivri comes in. The Eved Ivri comes in because they have to pay a debt to society, or because they can't support themselves, or whatever. But you must not give him labor that will break his back. You must be concerned for his welfare, even as that person is working for you. Going back to what I've been learning in the Mishnah Torah, when the stripes are administered, one of the things that it says, among many of the instructions, is that if you see the person is waning, that it's too much for them, you stop. You don't continue. In other words, this is one of the questions we ask often in our own society, is the action that we are to take when somebody does something wrong intended to be corrective or rehabilitative or punitive? There's a difference. There's a difference. The focus here is on corrective and rehabilitative actions. Yes, there's an onesh, there's a punishment, but it comes with limits for the person who's being punished and with limits for the person who's administering. This Eved Ivri, this person who's fallen on hard times, and you are hiring him as a servant to work the land, must be employed by you as an employee. He may work with you only until the Jubilee year, and of course we know about the sabbatical year. If they are dismissed, they are released. If they want to stay, you pierce their ear. When he leaves you, he must leave with his children, return to his family, and resume his status from before. That's another thing that is unique to Jewish law, which is also being discussed in this text that I am presently learning every day. I did not know, by the way, I write these Divrei Torah weeks in advance because I like to stay on top of things. Those that know me know I'm not a last-minute person. So I didn't know this is where I was going to be, but it just works out that way so well, right? So again, the idea is that once someone has been punished in the Sanhedrin, they are to be restored to their previous position in society, and everyone is to treat them properly. Even the Kohen HaGadol is subject to punishment. So the Kohen HaGadol, again, the Kahuna, remember, is by inheritance. So they're subject to the same punishments for the same misdeeds. There's no you get away with things because of your position here. Something to consider. And then you restore them. However, the only exception is the Rosh Sanhedrin, the Rosh Beit Din. Why? Because the scholar that is supposed to show everyone by example, we talked a lot about the Kohanim and restrictions on them. So this is the restriction on the Rosh Beit Din, that if this person has this position accorded to them in the community as the chief lawmaker, not the adjudicator, but the chief lawmaker, then they must always be exemplary, and they cannot be restored to their position from before. And again, as it is explaining these factors of punishment and returning people to their previous status and all that, again, we get our pismon, ki avadi hem avadai. They are my servants. They're not your servants. The Eved Ivri is God's servant, just as all of us are. They are my servants. I brought them out of Egypt. They must not be indentured and sold. And finally, it says, "Lo tirdebo beperach v'yirat hamelokecha." You may not give them back breaking labor. You must fear God. God is the one who has, in a sense, made you the vehicle of the corrective action for them, to restore them to their position in society. Servants come only in specific situations and with very clearly dictated limits. For not being a slave servant to another is precisely what we learned not to do from the experience in Egypt. Remember, as I often say, God does not bring, and I said it earlier, the Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt to protect them from Amalek, to become them, but rather to do and show others how to do better. Our only ultimate position as servants, so to speak, is to God, not to other human beings. Think about it in the Birchot Parnasah, the blessing for livelihood that we say and what we bless our children with. One of the things we say is, may you always do the work you do, serving God, and not being at the behest of another human being. Now, of course, we know that, people have bosses and there are structures and organizations and all that. But again, this is a requirement in the Jewish context or gestalt for these people to act responsibly as well. That's why I know for me and for many, it hurts us even more when we see Jewish CEOs or people of power, rabbis or what have you, who abuse others. It hurts us more because they're supposed to be the example, not the worst. It is at this point that we read the Tochacha in Perek Chaf Vav 26 regarding what will happen if the Bnei Yisrael do not live as commanded. Finally, we end the book of VaYikra, the book that outlines all that it means for us to be Kedoshim, with vows and how they are made, as well as the value of various entities for whom and by whom such vows are made. This double Parsha begins and ends with limits. First, around the sabbatical and jubilee laws that remind us the land is not ours to do what we want with, but rather we are at best to be responsible caretakers. We end with limits as well, the limits on vows, so that they too not be swayed or determined by human capacity towards excesses. All of this is connected to Kedusha. We are to do all of the dictated practices to live the best life envisioned, and at the same time, not bend toward being ascetic, ignoring personal needs, and on the other end of the continuum, not living in such a self-centered manner that we ignore those around us. We discussed this last week in Parshat Amor in terms of trying to understand and come to terms with the limitations on the Kohanim. We as humans have limits. So we're basically being given guardrails to allow for those limits, to which God has acquiesced, if you will, since God's regretting making the human being way back in Bereshit. So if we can imagine for a moment, what do we do? How does God reframe this? How do we reframe this? Kedusha. Kedusha. We are to do all of the dictated practices to live the best life possible. We are to recognize and acknowledge our part in the community, our responsibility to make it the best collective possible, and to partake of the privileges it affords. This is what I would like to suggest, a central teaching of the entire book of VaYikra and the purpose of all its details. While it may appear that we are dealing with separate parts of our life, as described in our book of VaYikra, Rav David Tzvi Hoffman helps us to put all the pieces of this puzzle together as follows. 1. He suggests that Parak 27 and its focus on vows, consecration of belongings, and valuation of those involved in vows, is an extension of the halachot of Kedusha regarding all that comes into contact with the Mishkan and the Mikdash that are peppered throughout VaYikra. 2. The halachot of how we are to behave towards and with each other reflect Parak Yotet 19 with the command of Kedoshim Tehiyu, being Kadosh, Ki Anochi HaShem Kadosh. 3. The Kedusha of the human being, as outlined in Parak Yotet, is combined with the Kedusha of space, the land of Israel, and the Kedusha of time, the Chagim, which we have learned about, Shemitah and Yovel, as discussed specifically in Parak Chaf Hey in our double Parsha. It is in bringing these different elements of our lives together that we begin to understand how they form that Venn diagram that we call life, how they are interactive and interdependent upon each other. And 4, the donations being made here and their valuation on behalf of the Mishkan and the Mikdash bring us back to the beginning of the Sefer VaYikra, which discusses Avodat HaMishkan, the work of the Mishkan. Thus, the arachim, the vows discussed in Parak Chaf Zayin, appropriately conclude Sefer VaYikra by combining these two themes of the Sefer. The Kedusha that is brought to us by the Shekhinah's presence in the Mikdash, which is lofty and great. Remember the Ohel Moed. And the fact that we bring that Kedusha closer to us and take parts of it and replicate it in every aspect of our life. Seeing sanctity in every human being, in every event, in every place, and in every time. When one donates something physical to the Mikdash, one narrows the gap between the physical world and the spiritual world, bringing Kedusha to all aspects of life. We, in turn, do that by observing the mitzvot that are given to us with that ongoing pismon, that we should be Kadosh, we should be set apart, we should rise to the occasion that we've been granted, because God has granted us that occasion. So here we are at the end of VaYikra. We began with these laws of Kedusha. We end with bringing all of it together. And next week, we will begin with the adventures and misadventures of the Bnei Israel, Bamidbar, in the desert, with its physical and spiritual dimensions. As we go through these texts, often very difficult and with challenging occurrences, let us hold on to this notion of sanctity, what it really means to be a Goy Kadosh, with all of the privilege and responsibility, with all of the gifts and the limitations, and the wide spectrum of elements that reflect who we are as human beings, a sanctified people, daily being asked by God to do better and be better, in spite of what we see around us, as the Bnei Israel did in spite of the peoples that they lived amongst, the Mitzrim and the Canaanim, This is clearly an important and relevant lesson for our lives today and will stand the test of time. Chazak VeNitchazek. Shabbat shalom to all. Lehitraat.